well, we're still waiting for the projector, but in the meantime, we are going to have a talk by Grayson Wheatley, who is an MD, and he's going to be talking about a topic that we weren't really expecting to come from an MD. So when we saw this abstract come in, we thought this is really interesting and put him on the first day here. So I'm looking forward to this talk. We're talking about complexity science. And let's get the projector going. So, wait, so get the projector going? Get started.
Thank you, Tess. Well, good afternoon. All right, well, I wanted to share with you a presentation entitled What is Optimal Health? Complexity Science, Chaos Theory, and its Impact on Ancestral Health. Can everyone hear me? Good.
Yes.
All right. My disclaimer is that these comments and statements in no way reflect my employer, so that is my disclaimer as a practicing MD, and I think the other MDs in the audience can relate. But just a little bit of background about me. I'm a heart surgeon, and on a day-to-day basis, I take care of some very sick people and have the opportunity to help them get better. And this is kind of a typical day of taking someone who's either in the emergency room or in the intensive care unit, very sick, has a lot of medical problems, taking the operating room, doing some heart surgery and fixing them up, and then watching them get better. So the intuitive question is, why me and why am I here? I, over the last several years, have really gravitated towards the Ancestral Health Program and information, and I really found it helpful. And so last year I took the opportunity to present and talk a little bit about the tough road that physicians have, in that there are medical guidelines that we have that recommend certain ways to recommend advice to our patients, and then there's this emerging data that we're all experiencing here at this type of conference that is fascinating and wonderful and excellent, but hasn't quite made it to the clinic yet. And so I talked a little bit about how inflammation has been an important driver of atherosclerosis, and how the inflammatory markers and proteins in the cells are very similar to the atherosclerotic proteins in the cells, and there's probably a crossover there, and how the ancestral diet does decrease biomarkers for inflammation, and that could and probably will and does decrease and deflect the heart disease risk to a much lower state. This year I wanted to change and use a different topic, or tackle a different topic, and this is kind of a big question: is what is optimal health? Because if you go to different groups or different physicians or different people and ask them what does it mean to be healthy or optimally healthy, you're going to get different answers. So for example, if you go to a conference of vegans, for example, and ask them what optimal health is, their answer and their road path to that is going to be different than going to a different type of group. And so the other question is, if we have optimal health, how do we know it when we see it? Is it possible to even quantify or measure truly optimal health? How do we measure it, and how do we achieve it? So those are some of the questions that I'm going to address today. But at the end of the day, when we're talking about an ancestral health program or ancestral health diet, there's three components that really make up the ancestral health program, and I think that everyone in this room would appreciate. There may be different variations and various different takes, but it does involve three things: change in diet, exercise or movement, sleep, or relaxation. And so I think all those three components are necessary to really have a successful ancestral health program. And you could see here that obviously there are a lot of different variables that go into optimizing each of those individual categories. So the question is, inherently, what does ancestral health have to do with chaos theory? And likewise, what does chaos theory have to do with ancestral health? Well, I hope by the end of this talk that you'll agree with me that there is a very important contributor to the ancestral health program from chaos theory. Well, we all think of chaos in many different ways, and sometimes we think of chaos as a bad thing, but hopefully by the end of this talk we'll end up thinking of chaos as actually a good thing. It was really introduced into the vernacular, so to speak, in 1988 with this book about the first introduction to chaos theory. And some quotes from that are that alongside relativity in quantum mechanics is being hailed as a 20th century third revolution. And we got introduced to this concept that sounds a little bit fanciful, but it actually is somewhat relevant. It's called the butterfly effect. This effect grants the power to cause a hurricane in China to a butterfly flapping its wings in New Mexico. That sounds somewhat fanciful, but it's not. It actually is compliant with the chaos theory and many things that we've talked about today. So the intent behind the butterfly effect is that small changes in initial conditions can lead to drastic results depending on the starting conditions. And for this talk and preparation for this lecture, I really had some inspiration from these really wonderful, I think, excellent books. First one is Where Medicine Went Wrong by Bruce West, and I'll talk a little bit about that and use some of the references. And Complexity in Medicine, The Elephant in the Waiting Room. If anyone has any more interest in this, I really encourage you to look up these resources and references. They are fantastic. They're well written. They're easy to understand, but they really address a situation that not a lot of people are talking about. As we've heard this morning, Art Devaney has been a proponent of this, and I also drew inspiration and information from the New Evolution Diet, and obviously in the scene with our speaker this morning, I also used him as an inspiration, although I've got a little bit of a different take on it than he does. So as we get into this material, I want to begin with the foundational principles. The foundational principles were pretty much laid out by Stephen Jay Gould in this book called Full House. And in that book, his whole thesis was that the human mind has a trusty device for simplifying a complex world. We reduce to averages and identify trends. So we take all this complexity and we try to make it simple, and sometimes we fool ourselves, but that's in our inherent nature. And Stephen Jay Gould also said our culture encodes a strong bias either to neglect or ignore variation. We tend to focus instead on measures of central tendency, and as a result, we make some terrible mistakes, often with considerable practical import. So really, that quote about ignoring variation is really important, because chaos theory and complexity science is all about variation. And many of you have heard or seen or know about fractals. Well, fractals are very interesting. They're iterative patterns of nesting sequences with self-similarity. So if you could basically, within this fractal here, any point in the fractal is similar to the larger nature of the fractal. And that's kind of the definition of the fractal. But the human body is actually one big fractal. And there's something called fractal anatomy. If you look at all the blood vessels in the body and the way that they branch and divide and change size all throughout the body, that is truly a fractal pattern. Likewise, you can pick any other organ system in the body, the brain, the liver, kidneys, everything in the body organizes itself in a fractal anatomy pattern. And to me, that's a big clue or tip-off that there's something going on that is in connection with this fractal situation. And so I want to spend a couple of minutes here talking about heart rate. And this is where I think some really important information has been done, and I think there's a lot more work to be done in this area. So I want to talk about this article briefly called Heart Rate Variability in Athletes. So I want to introduce this concept of heart rate variability. So when we come in and see a patient in the clinic, we get an EKG. EKG prints out a page of heart rate, heart rhythm, and we look at the rhythm of the heart. And on there it says normal sinus rhythm, atrial fibrillation. It tells you the rhythm. And you look at it, and everything is spaced out pretty regularly in normal sinus rhythm. But if you could actually drill down and look at the actual rate of that the heart rate is going, there's a lot of variability in a healthy heart. So when you take your pulse and you feel that you're at a steady heart rate, that's one way of assessing health. But in fact, when you actually look at the electrophysiology behind that heartbeat, there is true inherent variability that's in a natural heartbeat. And it's done through this pathway, through the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems, and it becomes a balance of regulating the heartbeat. And so for those of you who don't look at EKGs very often, what we're talking about right here is this is the PQRS interval. And we're talking about the R to R interval, or the R to R rate. And that rate, when you analyze it, actually is inherently chaotic. So this is what the R to R interval is. if you graph out a series of heartbeats. So the first concept that I really want to introduce to you is that actually a chaotic heart rate is the normal rate and not just a standard steady state of heart rate. And when you start to do some more complex analytical study on this, you can see that there are patterns that arise even within this chaotic inner heartbeat R-to-R interval variability. And so there is some pattern, some macro pattern behind even the chaotic pattern of the heart rate. So I think it's really unnerving at some level to think that your heart beating at what you perceive as a normal rate is actually beating at a chaotically irregular rate. And so we call this a healthy complexity. So this complexity to the heart rate actually is the state of affairs and is a state of health and is a measure of health. And in fact, when you see how this heart rate can change, the heart rate variability, it can break down in two different ways. The first is that the heart rate variability can actually decrease. So think about that. You've got decreased heart rate variability, and that is a marker or sign of illness or health or disease. The other way that heart rate variability can break down is it can become completely chaotic, have no organized structure whatsoever, and have complete wild fluctuations. And that's another breakdown and a sign of illness or disease. And this study that I referenced earlier here, talking about heart rate variability in athletes or in trained individuals, is very interesting because this table shows that it compares people that have been trained with aerobic activities versus untrained individuals or control group. And you can see that people that participated in exercise and were trained individuals had greater heart rate variability than those that were in the control group. So this is an indicator that exercise and movement and fitness is actually a driver of increased heart rate variability in a good way. So in fact, when we're doing exercises and training, we're actually training the heart rate and training the nervous system to be more irregular. Another interesting fact about these heart rate variability is that there is a natural decline of the heart rate variability with aging. So there is a loss of chaos with aging to the heart rate variability as we age. So an older individual inherently has a more organized or less chaotic heart rate variability than someone who's younger. And that raises the question, you think about all those people out there with pacemakers in the medical device industry. Those pacemakers are sending out constant electrical impulses to the heart. So perhaps we need to be thinking about reprogramming those pacemakers or redesigning those pacemakers to actually have some degree of chaotic variability, or else we're actually training the heart to become diseased by sending out a constant pulse. Just food for thought. Well, this is really interesting, but is this something that's super specialized? Well, no. This is actually can be done by anyone, non-professional people. There are actually devices and applications out there that are non-medical affiliated that you can get to actually measure your heart rate variability. And I don't have any ownership or interest in any of these, so I'm not promoting anything. I'm just sharing that, for example, you can actually plug in on your heart rate monitor strap, and you can plug in with your app, and you can actually every day assess your own heart rate variability. And you need a baseline about 2 weeks of information. So you take your heart rate and readings every day at the same time, the same conditions, and you have your baseline. And then every morning that you get up, or whatever time you choose to do it, you actually measure your heart rate variability. And you can assess, is this a good day for my heart rate variability or a bad day for my heart rate variability? And you can tell based off of that, perhaps how you might change things in your lifestyle that day to compensate or address that change or decompensation of the variability. Here's another one called BioForce HRV, heart rate variability. So there are a number of commercial products available for the quantified self movement, so to speak. And I encourage anyone who has interest in this to try this. And there's a lot of people out there, doing the experiments N of 1 out there, and I think it would be interesting to really do some more work with this and get some experience. Well, I don't want to get too far off the track, but futuristically, the potential exists to remotely monitor soldiers or military in the field by wearing special monitors to monitor their heart rate variability. And that could be an early sign that they're in stress, that they're in trouble, or that they have sustained an injury that not yet has been detected. So this is a way that will be implemented with heart rate variability. And for any of you who know Eric Topol, he's been very prominent in talking about these smart Band-Aids, and they are literally EKG monitors that you can wear on your skin with just a piece of adhesive tape, and through these monitors you can actually monitor the heart rate. And so I think as we begin to quantify and find ways to measure the heart rate, we're going to be studying heart rate variability in greater detail. So we talked a little bit about heart rate variability in exercise. And in fact, I will say that professional athletes are using this and teams are using this to assess training of their athletes. And so they will every day have their athletes assessed for heart rate variability, and if their heart rate variability has changed, they will change their training program to make sure that they're not overtrained. And this is something that's really being implemented, but we have a long way to go. This is not something that's in the clinic. It's not something that your physician, cardiologist, or specialist would actually use in the clinic. It's actually starting to get some traction outside of the clinic, and will work its way in. But what about diet? Can diet affect heart rate variability? That's the next question. And the answer is yes. And here's a paper that did a review article looking at omega-3 fatty acid supplementation and heart rate variability. And in this paper, they proposed that the theory or the sequence is that omega-3 fatty acids may modulate the automatic control of the heart, autonomic control of the heart. And we know that omega-3 fatty acids are abundant in the brain and nervous tissue as well as in cardiac tissue. And studies have demonstrated a positive association between cellular content of omega-3 fatty acids and heart rate variability. And supplementation with omega-3 fatty acids seems to increase heart rate variability. And remember, it's what we're looking to increase the heart rate variability. We do not want decreased heart rate variability. That is a sign of illness and disease. And so we actually want to increase that. So by actually adding a particular dietary element, we can actually improve and increase the heart rate variability, which is a sign of health. And so this could be a possible explanation for a decreased risk of arrhythmic events and sudden cardiac death, which is sometimes observed after omega-3 fatty acid supplementation. So yes, diet can affect heart rate variability. So we talked about exercise, diet. What about sleep? Could sleep affect heart rate variability, or could heart rate variability affect sleep? Which came first, huh? So there are a number of different articles. They're all small studies, so we're not talking about huge aggregate studies. We're talking about studies that say that, for example, this one, subjective sleep quality and heart rate variability in hemodialysis patients. And you did show that the quality of the sleep that the individual had the night before did affect the heart rate variability the next day. And that was a controlled variable study. Everything else kept the same. Here's another study. Reduced heart rate variability predicts poor sleep quality in a case control study of chronic fatigue syndrome. So this is the other side of the coin. So you've got decreased heart rate variability predicting that night the individual is going to have a poor night's sleep because their heart rate variability has declined, which is a marker of disease. So it could actually predict a lot of things. It's pretty interesting. And then finally, this is a little bit larger study, heart rate variability, sleep, and sleep disorders, once again showing that the quality of the sleep can affect the health of the individual. So heart rate variability has, I think, a lot of interest, a lot of potential for helping us understand what is optimal health and hopefully giving us feedback on determining and living a optimally healthy lifestyle. And this is part of the anticipatory medicine movement, where a signal complexity can affect health, and likewise health can affect signal complexity. And this is not just about heart rate variability. You can look at many other ways of ordering and measuring health, such as sleep apnea, breathing patterns. Breathing patterns inherently are also chaotic, have the same breathing pattern variability that heart rate variability has. Likewise, brain waves are inherently chaotic in a macroscopic way. Also, gait patterns. Measuring the patterns in which somebody walks is an indicator of chaos, as well as chaos is reflected in their gait pattern. And the person that discovered and really championed the heart rate variability, said we're developing and refining computational tools to pull the useful information out of extremely complex data sets. So I think this is kind of the future where we're going. To have shown that ancestral health does have a component to chaos theory, and chaos theory may be one of the underlying components of our underlying health and physiology. And as I said about this fractal idea, we talked about fractal anatomy, every organ system in the body organizing itself in a fractal manner. We have all of our organ physiology, fractal breathing, fractal gait, fractal temperature, fractal neurons. All of them architecturally are fractal, and all of them are organized in a fractal pattern. So I'll start to wrap this up, but I want to start to finish up with this idea of a fractal gut. If you look at the way that the small bowel is organized in the body, you can see that it has a kind of a chaotic but rhythmic pattern to it. And you can see that histologically, the villi in the small intestine are also organized in a fractal pattern, very similar to the macros pattern of the small intestine. And when you look at someone who is gluten sensitive or sensitive to the effects of gluten or celiac disease, you can see they actually have a breakdown of this fractal pattern. You can see macroscopically, you can see that the actual villi are dampened over here compared to a normal healthy villi. So once again, it's a demonstration of loss of fractal, loss of chaos, loss of variability as a way of showing disease or representing disease. So I'm really interested and excited to explore that with you, and I think we're out of time, so I will wrap that up so we have questions, but I hope that we can explore this in depth in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Grayson. We're running a little bit behind time, so we'll have a few questions.
Thanks for a great talk. A couple of things you mentioned, the postural issues, the sleep hygiene issues. I just wanted to mention that all in HRV disruptions shows up in very early childhood, under the age of 5, and it's flying way under the radar of most physicians. So it's just a comment.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's just another example of how important it will be.
Yes, could you speak to, I'm aware of heart rate variability and the work of the Institute of Heart Math and variability as it deals with stress and the smoothness of that. Could you say a few words about that in relationship, if you could?
Absolutely. That's another component. So as we talked about, we have exercise or movement, we have diet, we have sleep. But within the sleep or relaxation mode, we do have the heart math program and the heart rate variability associated with stress and mindfulness and meditation. And those are just manifestations of disruptions of the autonomic nervous system when you've got stress. And it's another way that we need to help control or monitor the heart rate variability. But it's not just about taking stress out of your life. It can be the other factors as well: exercise, diet, sleep. So a lot of people think if they take out the stress, then everything else is going to be okay. But I'm trying to show, obviously, that it's a lot more than that. But a good point about the mindfulness as well. Thank you.
As you showed that decreased HRV is associated with a disease state, but do we know for a fact that it's necessarily good to increase HRV in a seemingly otherwise healthy person? Like, could there be some limit at which it becomes detrimental?
Yes. So that's where the overtraining aspect is. That's a great question. So there obviously is a threshold or limit to which you want to get the HRV to, but it really becomes a baseline individual interdependence. So that's where the professional athletes will check out their heart rate variability every day. And so they're to be overtrained. So yes, you don't want to push yourself or train too much, and then you have too much heart rate variability, and then you've got a problem. So absolutely, that's something that's a concern. Thank you.
I just wanted to ask about entropy. So you say that the HRV decreases as people age. So is that just a function of increased entropy, or is there something else going on that is actually just a normal biological process that is, like, what in the aging process is causing that? Is it an increased entropy? Is it essentially decrease in total energy, like whatever that is defined as biologically?
That's a great question, and we don't know the answer to that, or at least the answer is not in the literature, and that's obviously an area that we need to do a lot more research on. But we do know that we can see somebody when they're ill, they have loss of heart rate variability. So an illness, for that individual, is not necessarily a loss of their total energy. It's just that it's a marker of their illness. So by that natural entropy over time, with the aging process, we think that the chaos is necessary for health, and that by losing the chaos over time is a sign of the manifestation of the complex things.
Okay, we're gonna wrap up and move on to survival, but I think.
Thank you.